welcome to Better Gaming, an event and podcast series dedicated to all aspects of ethical gambling as we seek to discuss how to make gambling and gaming safe, secure and socially balanced for everyone. I'm Jim, I'm your host, and today's guest is Ciaran Henry, someone who has done it all when it comes to making gambling safer. He's a specialist in this field. He has extensive experience working for platforms and operators on safer gambling teams. He's run events, he's led panel discussions, and also gets involved in content curation. And on that note, he's now launching a newsletter called Sensible Gaming. Ciaran, welcome to the show.
Nice to meet you, Jim. Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure having you on, Ciaran. So in today's episode, as I mentioned, we're going to be discussing your latest project, Sensible Gaming, which is a newsletter that hits the middle ground of gambling and gaming. It's something that I'm really interested in because in earlier videos, I've spoken about the similarities between the appeal of gambling and gaming, and it's something that doesn't really have much coverage. Your new newsletter is on the Substack platform, and you'll be able to find it on sensiblegaming.substack.com, or just click on the show notes wherever you're accessing this episode and you'll see a link on it there. I've received a couple of editions since signing up and I can highly recommend it. Now, if you're connected with Ciaran on whatever platform like I am, and I first met Ciaran on LinkedIn, you'll know why this newsletter matters so much. He's got independent thought, independent thinking, and he's a deep experience in safer gambling means that he can bring something different to the conversation. If you do sign up for the newsletter or you do connect with him on LinkedIn, you'll see from his posts that is something of a recurring theme amongst his content and his thoughts, and he's not afraid to challenge the status quo. Before we dive into the newsletter and what it will be delivering in the coming months, and referencing what I said earlier, I'd like to understand your journey into safer gambling. And it all started in the poker world before branching out into gambling, mainstream and gaming. Is that right, Ciaran?
Yes. So my background from way back when was, like many people of my generation, and we're similar age, I started playing poker much younger. I obviously grew up a kid in the 90s before there was prevalent streaming or just prevalent access to online age before the internet, believe it or not. So at an early age, I was taught poker and other card games like bridge, pontoon, cauldron by my family members and by older relatives. So I've always had an interest in poker. Then when I was about 18, 19, I actually went to work at a video games retailer. So that's where the first part of the story started. I started selling video games being part of my life, my entire natural born. When I left that, at the time I was still a moderate poker player. I'd still play live events, I played a little bit of online. Nothing of notoriety, it was nothing special. But I've always had an interest in it, and what stood out for my friends was I knew other variants of poker rather than just Texas Hold'em. I would have known 5-card draw, I would have known Juice to 7 from learning these games growing up. So in 2009, the end of the year around Christmas 2009, I left the game shop I worked for and was given the opportunity to come work for Full Tilt Poker, initially as nighttime cover, given my poker background, given my understanding of customer engagement, also customer service job. And from then, I moved on, became into VIP, then got the opportunity to join the poker team as a dedicated poker specialist. Dream job for a while. For those of you who know Full Tilt Poker, I don't need to go over what happened next. You can look it up. It's quite a story. Following on from that, I moved into training for poker and then training into what was called back then responsible gaming. It was an area of customer engagement, especially back in the online gambling world. So this 2009, 2010, which was pretty undercovered, and it was a pretty new realm for online gambling, is in the engagement of the ethical and the safer playing behaviours. So these were cases, this was a particular subject matter that I found very appealing, very interesting. I was given and empowered by my managers at the time to take over the pre-existing procedures, pre-existing cases, become the reference point for safer gambling cases. From that, it turned out I had a natural affinity for it. That was something I was pretty good at. So when Full Tilt Poker lost their license, spoiler alert for anyone that doesn't know, I was tasked by Full Tilt Poker management to train the operational staff in both how to play poker and then subsequently into responsible gaming cases and general responsible gaming procedure. This was my first introduction to training, which is where a lot of my background is, at my love of poker, my love of teaching, and then into safer gambling as well. And then when Full Tilt and PokerStars merged following a long sojourn in 2012, I was given the opportunity to join the PokerStars well-established and highly regarded dedicated safer gambler team. So this was March 2013. And that was my sole area of business in the online gambling world. The sole responsibility and task I undertook for an operator from 2013 until I left the industry in 2023. So that's 10 years of doing only safer gambling.
So that's sort of
brings us up to where we are now.
You must have sort of like a real depth of experience of different cases, both with the customers, but also internally, how operators and platforms handle safer and healthier play amongst their customers, right?
I noticed, like, I've worked now directly for three operators, Full Tilt, PokerStars, and then for a short period of time, GG. Then I would have worked indirectly with other operators who were part of what the Flutter umbrella, the parent company of PokerStars. I would have had access and a level of engagement with my opposite numbers in their departments. And internally, as you said, customers dealing with their departments, other policies, regulatory bodies, treasury, compliance, legal, marketing, security, operations. Who else was involved? Internal products, like product management, which a lot of safer gambling specialists wouldn't really, in my experience now, having talked to so many, they wouldn't have access to developers. They wouldn't have had access to program managers. I did.
Okay, so with that, in that time from when you started to when you left, I presume that the attitudes and the processes and the procedures must have changed drastically.
Tremendously. It's like night and day. Something that stood out to me this year was this year's Safer Gambling Week, that runs at tail end of November every year, and it's led by the European Gaming Council in conjunction with the British Game Council. Was the exposure and the level of highlights that I received, even in mainstream media. I think back to when I started, and even when I was fully established in 2014, 2015, there was next to no public outcry for safer gambling. It was a serious department, I can tell you right now. It was something I took very seriously. The work was there, but the public understanding perception wasn't. That's now a completely different world. It's a different landscape from when I started to what we have now. We have ads from major operators promoting safer gambling. We have When the Fun Stops, with all that signposting, all that copy that you hear on advertisements. That wasn't there when I started.
And so with this new landscape brings new opportunities, which brings me perfectly onto your latest project. So as mentioned, you're bringing all of this experience and all this insights into something new, the Sensible Gaming newsletter. Now, as mentioned in the intro, you're looking to sort of bridge two different worlds of gambling and gaming. Can you just give a bit more detail about that? Because for me, that's super interesting, because I can see how both of those worlds, whether it's video games or gambling, have elements of compulsive play or addictive elements to it. And there's certainly a massive crossover.
I actually had a conversation today to illustrate this with some people I regularly engage in as part of my day job. And one of them highlighted that they understood that a lot of people start in young age from loot boxing, which we now consider standard fare for most games, that could lead to future gambling concerns and later life, especially when people have come up legal age, that they would have learned and they would have become acclimated to loot box mechanics. That's the small amount of money on a chance outcome where you will get something. You may not get what you want, but you will get something. So it touches on a huge amount of behaviours that's already well established with regards to gaming and gambling behaviours. And I thought, that's it. It's like, this is a person who's got it. But to roll back a little bit, there's always been a crossover between gambling and gaming. Predominantly gaming is young men, or even men who've grown up with it, like yourself, myself. And then the same will always exist with gambling. Gambling, while it is now more diverse between men and women, is still very heavily leveraged towards men. The emotional behaviour, the aggressive behaviour, the passion that people invest in gaming, what can sometimes be very, very insular pursuits. All of this definitely can be plugged and played right into gambling. And some of the mechanics from gambling is plug and play right into gaming. And I'll reiterate the idea of loot boxing, the idea of microtransactions. You're paying a small amount of real money. I use the term investing very, very lightly here. It's not investment, but it's the most accurate term. Invest/spending. Real money out, your real money on the potential outcome to get what you want. The difference between loot boxing and gambling, though, is in loot boxing, you're guaranteed some sort of result. May not be what you want, but you might get something. The example I had today is you want the bastard sword, but you might get 10 shields instead. Whereas in gambling, that same financial investment, chance, RNG outcome, you may end up with nothing. So that's part of it. Also, if you go back into the passion people have for it, the hours of dedication, that's proven by neuroscience and proven by brain chemistry, that there's a certain similar behaviours, especially when people cross over into what I consider detrimental behaviours. There's always and to simplify it all, they're two of my passions. They're two of my favourite areas I've always been. I've always been a poker player. I've always been into gaming. Like someone would say, gaming has been my ruination. It's my lifelong love affair.
So what games do you get involved with? Okay.
Souls likes, if there's one, I played them. They are my bread and butter. And I've played all types of games. I've been a gamer, so I've worked in a game shop, and it's a perfect job. So I've had all consoles. I've followed every generation of gaming. And I've been lucky at being in a situation where I've been able to afford these machines and these games. But once I stumbled on Dark Souls and the Souls-like genre about 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, that was it. That was this is my suit. I'm now wearing this once and for all.
And you're a loyal man. You're just sticking with that genre.
Every one of them. I'm actually, without giving a spoiler, I'm actually in the process of writing an article about specifically what is the appeal of Souls-likes and how, in a weird way, in a less direct way, they does actually have a correlation with poker, with online poker. So when that comes out, you'll probably see what I'm intimating at.
Okay. So what made you decide now to start the Sensible Gaming newsletter?
It's been on my list, and it's been something I've been thinking about for a while. I've written for other organizations. I've done bits and pieces from consulting work, but a couple of opportunities came up, and I'm nearly 40, so I thought, realistically, why not? If no one reads it, no one reads it. If it becomes very popular, it becomes very popular. I'm not doing it as a financial investment. I'm doing it as a project. That's something I'm very passionate by. So why not? Luckily, my professional job and my responsibilities fallen in a way that I have the capacity now to do it. So I'm going to try. And if you don't try, you don't succeed.
Exactly. This is exactly what I'm doing with this podcast. My focus is obviously on ethical gambling, so much that I'm from a very different gambling sector. I'm from the societal lotteries, and I'm finding my way in this world of, coming across sort of the worlds of poker and online sports books. So I'm finding it super interesting. How are you trying to get that little gap between all the other newsletters and podcasts and content creators currently out in play in the moment?
It is a pretty saturated marketplace. What I think my niche is, I have professional experience in both sectors. A lot of people will comment video games is predominantly led by journalists. You don't see too many people who work in the game sector or selling games, even game producers. They don't tend to be that prevalent. A lot of it is journalists who will have one particular point of view, and it's perfectly valid. Same enough with the gambling sector. You get journalists, commentators, but very often the actual voices of the people who work there, to use a common expression, who worked in the trenches, is rare. So I think where my work and where my Substack may stand out is that I have been, especially in the gambling sector, I've been there for 15 years. It's been my entire adult life has spent working in the gambling sector, overwhelmingly working specifically for gambling efforts, for gambling initiatives. I worked on, when I was leaving PokerStars, I had daily exposure to about 25 to 26 global licenses. I've probably amassed something like 16 or 17,000 hours of real world player case handling. I've trained about 40 dedicated safer gambling specialists. I've created and designed a couple of safer gambling procedures and tools. So on top of that, I think that level of experience and both data and anecdotal information, I think will appeal to a lot of people, because I'm not someone who has a particular slant, as you said. I have a completely independent down the line, down the middle sort of look on things, but I also have the years and years of experience to back up my positions and what the position I'm taking it on. I think I hope, more so than think, I hope there's an appetite, especially as gambling becomes more and more, even in the US, where it becomes more and more prolificated across different markets. And there's so much media exposure to what can be very real negative consequences. But that's not the only aspect. I think that's where unfortunately, a lot of people get sort of pigeonholed into the idea or blinded by the idea that gambling will inevitably lead to harm. Well, it doesn't. Not for everybody. The percentage of people who end up what we would consider legitimate harm is small. And it's everywhere. Very rarely is there non-opinion and non-partisan conversations about gambling.
And so just on that element, I stuck on the word appetite there. What can people, readers, subscribers, what can they expect in terms of how frequent the newsletter is going to be, what sort of content you're going to be including in it, just in terms of there, you're talking about your objectiveness and independent thought, but, are you going to get guests on? Are you going to do thought pieces? Can you give us some idea of the newsletter in that form?
I haven't got a completely nailed down schedule yet, because I'm only just started. I'm only just launched at the start of the month properly. I have half a dozen articles written at the moment. Some of them are other articles I wrote elsewhere else. I'm just recycling them. I'm trying to move all my work from LinkedIn predominantly onto my Substack, onto the Sensible Gaming page. With regards to a release schedule, I'm aiming to have a meaty piece of content every 2 weeks for the time being. Then, should circumstance allow, it'll either increase or decrease depending on life. I'm not going to be tied down or give any guarantees, because best laid plans and whatnot. But I'm looking to do video interviews with people I think are very interesting, people who I have respect for, and who I do think their insight and their stories will resonate more. One of the big things when I initially came up with the idea of Sensible Gaming and first was sort of talking about why I would do it and what I think where it lands, is a lot of gambling correspondence, a lot of gambling conversations is between business to business people or lived experience to lived experience people or regulatory to regulatory. What I know from years and years of dealing with customers and talking to my own friends and family and general public is a lot of information and a lot of decisions that happen in gambling, the understanding never trickles down to the actual base level, which is your punters, which is ultimately the people who are funding every aspect of gambling. So what I would hope with the Sensible Gaming newsletter is that everyday punters get a bit of information, get a bit of clarity, a bit of education as to what goes on in the gambling world, why decisions are made by companies, why decisions are made by regulators, why are those ads on television, to try and take away some of the magic or allure of the gambling section, to basically translate it for everyday consumption. That's what I'm hoping, and that's what I think the video interviews and my articles, that's where I hope they will land as with people, is that your general punter will scroll on their phone or check a website and go, okay, so that's how deposit limits work. That's why they want me to take up deposit limits. That's why there's age ratings on games. These sort of stuff. It may seem silly and obvious, but when you assume people understand this information, it's where people get into trouble.
Okay, so it's very much an insider's newsletter for the mass market, so that they can understand the stories or the story behind the headlines or the actions that they're seeing when they're interacting either by gambling or gaming.
Fingers crossed. It's a lofty goal, I will admit, but if you don't try, you'll never know.
Will you be doing anything in terms of interactive elements with the subscribers, or?
I have quite a few plans down the line, but I'm not going to be committed to anything just yet. Let's see. I want to see what sort of uptake there is before we start committing to anything, because as I said, this is a project, so I'm not going to overly extend myself. funny enough how that works with gambling as well. I'm not going to overly extend myself at the start until I see some results. So there's an expression that we used to use when I was teaching poker when regards to stakes, especially for cash games. You only move up in stakes when you've cracked the level you're at. So I'm going to hopefully crack the level I'm at now before I start committing into big webinars and stuff like that. Because I don't know, I just don't know what level of interest there is yet.
Yeah, well, there's two elements to that. So the answer you just given. The first is, one, I really like the name Sensible Gaming. You mentioned that the operators used to refer to things like responsible gaming. I see that seems to have gone a little bit out of vogue.
Yes,
There's a lot of terminology as the industry progresses or we progress as a society. But sensible gaming is one of those ones where I was literally like, he's come up with such a great term. I wish I had it for my one, because I'm focused on ethical gambling, and as I said on the outset, from making it safe, secure, and socially balanced for everything. And sensible really just emphasizes all of that. And I think it is that element of the balance that helps bring a sensible conversation about a pretty divisive industry. When you were saying about, people sit in different camps and they rarely meet in the middle. And I think something like this will be really beneficial. And then the second part is, I think a lot of people are beholden to an algorithm or a set schedule. And with that, there becomes a dip in quality, or they feel a need to release things. And I think sometimes we can overrate that. And so you're saying that basically when you release something on the Sensible Gaming newsletter, it will be as you wish it to be, of a high quality and something of interest, as opposed to, just scrambling around for some sort of hook to deliver on a bi-weekly or weekly basis.
Yeah, that's it exactly. Yeah, I will quantify everything and caveat everything by I'm fully aware of the idea that perfect is the enemy of the good. I'm not going to sit on something and then mill over it to the nth degree just because I want it to be absolutely perfect. There's no such thing. But I'm also not going to release any old rubbish just for the sake of it. As I said, this is a project of mine. I don't want to go as far as say pet project, but something I'm doing for enjoyment, and I think it has value. So I'm not just going to start throwing out material, as you said, to appease an algorithm. Nobody may ever read it. Some people, industry people may read it. Some people might read it and find it funny. That's okay. Like I said, I do think there is a definite need for a more objective, non-camped or non-polarized conversation about gambling, and gaming as well. There's so much concern about gaming addiction and gaming behaviours. But how many people ever sat down and just had a conversation about, well, maybe if I had done this at the start, or maybe if I did this, or maybe if I thought this through better. That's the thing. Like I said, at different points in my life, I probably would have hit certain markers. The PGISI scale is used for gambling to determine gambling. Well, if I had to change that to gaming, I probably would have come a little closer to the line that I want. But I've come back, I've recognized the patterns, I've talked to people smarter than me, giving me advice. I think the same thing happens as well if you apply that to other people, that here's a person who sold video games for years. Here's what you can look out for. Here's how trade-ins work for people who still use trade-ins. Here's why the prices are so on and so forth. Here's how you avoid saturation and diminishing returns. Oh, you want to get into gambling? Well, before you do place any money, bear in mind the learning curve here. It's extremely expensive. Why don't you set yourself low and learn? If you're learning poker, learn on free platforms. If you're going to the sports book, well, why don't you start off with a £1? And here's why. It's not to be a killjoy or a nanny state. Here's what you can actually learn. And here's why there's benefits to using tools and why there's benefits to using the features, rather than just doing this because it's good for you. That doesn't hit with anybody.
Okay, so that's really good, because just on that, I've got a question here about what people can expect in terms of topics for the first few editions. Now, given what you've just said, I don't really want to ask that question anymore. But what I would like to say is something that's of serious interest to me is loot boxes and skin betting. Will you be covering that in the next couple of editions of your newsletter?
Yes. Loot boxes, yes. Skin betting down the line. I want to talk to a few more people about it and get a bit more insight before I come to I know about it, but I'm not a full first expert on it yet, so I don't want to just say for the sake of it. So I will be hopefully having a guest who actually works in that area to explain more about skin betting. But loot boxes, yes, as I said, I actually did a lesson today. For clarification, my full-time job is I'm a teacher. I left the gaming industry and went into education. So I actually did a lesson today about the correspondence and the correlation between gambling and loot boxing, why there is a lot of similarities and why they're actually different in other ways. So if someone asks, is loot boxing gambling? The best answer I have is yes and no. There are some, yes, matching behaviours, and there's other things that are slightly different. But I will definitely go into that. Hopefully, maybe early next month. And as I said, I'm just planning it out at the moment. I've already written up a few bits and pieces.
Well, it sounds like each newsletter edition will have quite a bit of a backlog of data and research that you're doing for it. So it's not just your thoughts and your opinion on all of these different matters, but only after you've almost done sort of a dissertation research on, whatever subjects you're talking about, which is really useful because I just think that there's a lot of, as we said earlier, a lot of noise of content and not really considered or sensible content.
Yeah. I don't want everything to be super data driven and to become basically, like, as you said, a dissertation, because I think you lose people that way. You can alienate people if you make it too complicated, or you get too far down into minutiae. So one of the frameworks I'm using is, said I'm a teacher. So some of the material I'm going to put out, I basically dry run it with my students as a lesson plan, or at least it's just a topic of conversation, and I'll see how that resonates with general people. I talk to friends, I talk to family, I spitball the ideas before I release them, because I'm looking for so engagement. It's nice if people on our level, people in the industry, people in the third sector, people in gaming companies, it's nice that they see it as well, but that's not what I actually set out to do. I want to try and translate this information and these stories and this material to a much more easy to understand, a much wider audience. Because I think when it comes to gaming, a lot of behaviours, loot boxes, parents don't understand this for the last part. Students don't understand it. Kids don't understand it. Well, why not explain it to them in a way that they would, rather than overly relying on data from the AMA or the British Psychiatric Society or from mental health hospitals, which is all very good and all very relevant, and I will include some of it. But I think you will lose people at that rate as well. A lot of people don't want a lesson, if you know what I mean. Like, they don't want to be too formalized, because it's alienating, I think.
Yeah, I mean, loot boxes for me is something that I find fascinating and absolutely frightening in equal measure. My son is 9 years old. I see him on his Xbox, and it's not only loot boxes, it's personal interactions with his friends and group dynamics, but also digital currencies. I see him on V-Bucks, and there was a recent report about online casinos masking as games, but also using their currency of V-Bucks Robux, to then convert into different digital currencies. And it's the same with Fortnite as well, which, just absolutely obsessed with it in terms of getting new skins and currencies on that as well. So, anything that can provide me a lesson, even if it's under the guise of a newsletter or a story, would be much appreciated, Ciaran. Just to finish this conversation, and I know that this might give some insight into what you're forming over the next sort of 18 to 24 months, but given your background in safer gam, how do you see it changing over the next 2 years, just in terms of the trends or the key issues?
I think the one issue with safer gambling is, and in general gambling, is it's segregated into different countries. Each country has different licenses. Each country has a different cultural relationship with gambling. So most of my work currently is targeted towards the UK market. UK is where I spend most of my years working for the gambling companies. I think there's going to be a much bigger public discussion and public exposure about gambling behaviours, and ideally positive gambling behaviours. I think that for a number of reasons, the gambling industry in the UK have somehow become they've become basically one of the cultural evils. Politicians kick them when they need an easy win. The media will always put out the negative stories because it generates interest. And everybody knows somebody who was very, very badly affected by gambling. He's become a gambling addict. What I hope to see is, I believe there's a report back in October where there's, I think it's called the Lancet report. There's going to be talks of moving towards a public health approach towards gambling. So for focusing on the UK, and then we'll move into Ireland because we're not yet fully regulated. It will happen, so I'll go there first. But for the UK, I want to see, or I think the best thing to do would be, if they brought the gambling ads, they limited the amount of gambling ads, especially for football and sporting events. But if they brought in an industry-wide education program, because the thing that always finds of gambling, and if you listen to stories about people who've got into harm or affected loved ones, one of the common threads, not the always one, but one of the common threads, and I even know it for myself and engaging customers and people I work in the charity and the treatment sector, is people don't understand, at least initially, what they're doing. That's not to be insulting, that's not to put the onus of blame back onto them. I'm not going to beat that particular drum. But it's one of the areas where people spend money without fully understanding what they're doing. There's an old joke, I think it's the Phil Silver show way back when, and Sergeant Bilko was winning money left, right and centre because he's claiming he's ignorant about it. But the opposite is also true, is that people win money without understanding, but people lose money without understanding what they're doing. So I would like to see, instead of an idea to pretend it's not there, or instead of making it a aggressive or emotive subject, that everyone acknowledges it's here, it's part of the entire ecosystem, it's part of the ether of the society. It's a huge driver of employment, it's a huge driver of recreational fun, it's a massive contributor to the exchequer. That there's ads and there's a general maturing of the conversation. So maybe educational programs, because I know a number of companies offer free education programs. To see a massive take about it. And this is going to be a very controversial idea. If in certain age groups, so 18 and older, for secondary schools, gambling literacy and gambling competency is probably a better term for gambling competency, was at least entertained in schools. People are going to do it anyway. There's no point trying to pretend otherwise it doesn't happen. Same with drugs. We now do drugs awareness. We do financial literacy courses in schools to make sure people don't get into credit card debt, so people know about their mortgage, know about their wages, know about interest rates. Well, the same applied I would like to see for gambling. Then followed by proper media exposure for, this is how deposit limits work. This is why you should use them. It's not to curtail your fun, but it's a sensible idea. So I think that's the trend. There's going to be the introduction of the levy in the UK is going to have a big impact. I'm not going to comment positive in one way or the other, but it is going to be something that changes the landscape a bit. I definitely think more and more companies, whether or not people believe it, more and more companies are putting huge resources towards positive play and safer gambling initiatives. The days of the gambling companies just wanted to grab you by the heels, shake you out and throw you in the... They're gone. They've been gone for years. I would also, lastly, and now I'm dragging all this, one other thing I would love to see, and I hope that the public understanding of legitimate operators and the black market, people finally start to really understand what the black market is, the dangers it provides, and why, if they're going to gamble, they should do so on a reputable, licensed operator. Because if nothing else, you have no consumer rights for a black market. We all know about consumer protection, things like Watchdog, things like the Standard Authority, the Ombudsman of customer engagement practices. I think, yeah, overall, I would hope over the next 18 to 24 months, by about 2027, that the number of harm that is done by gambling goes down, and the number of people that understand what it is and how it interacts with their life goes up.
I think you just mentioned there probably about 15 or 20 things that I would find like super interesting. And I'm sure, hopefully, touch wood, with all best laid plans, etc., that I do hope feature in your newsletter. So that just leaves me just to thank you for your time, Ciaran. It's been really fascinating conversation. There's so many elements that I could go into, particularly with the public health, but also about the stigma reporting of gambling addiction and how it's somehow not as impactful as other addictions that would have substances that have that physicality of it, because it's a neuroscience addiction, I guess, for want of a better phrase. But yeah, I don't know how I'm going to turn it. I might have to just cut that bit.
Actually, I think you know what you're getting at. Yeah, the gambling addiction stories they generate big headlines, and again, they're very emotive.
Yeah,
Very, very emotive. They're sort of being corrupted, I think, by certain outlets, certain media outlets, because they guarantee clicks, they guarantee subscription, they guarantee the expression paper never, ink never refuse paper. Then definitely they take up a lot of bandwidth with people. And they do resonate, like they hit really hard. That's one of the ideas, and it's one of the areas I want to tackle with sensible gaming, is to clarify that I'm not underplaying gambling addiction. I understand gambling addiction better than a lot. And I work with treatment organizations. I have a lot of relationships with a number of different organizations and the amazing work they do both here and in the UK and even some in the US. I talk to people who lived experience, have an utmost respect for lived experience. Lived experience is part of my life. But I think that we need to get away from the idea of as soon as people read a gambling story, they go, just take the Kill Bill music. I'd love to see a movement away from that. Yeah, actually cut this. I'll come up with
I'm just going to tell you now, I'm not cutting any of it. I'm not cutting any of it, because this is a pure example of, I think we could talk endlessly about all different subjects, and I do hope that element that we're talking about the stigma reporting or the sensational reporting of gambling.
Sensational, that's what I should have said. The sensational reporting, yes.
But I hope that features in your newsletter as well. And if not, maybe I can get you on this podcast again and we can just dedicate it, have a half an hour chat about that subject in isolation, because I could talk to you all day. So listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link in the show notes to your newsletter. I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile. Is there any other sort of contact points if somebody wants to get in contact, or they might want to input into your newsletter?
Yeah, you can email me at ciaranhenry1@outlook.com. That's where you reach me. If you want to get in contact with me, that's the way you can reach.
Okay, and I'll put that email address into the notes as well, wherever anyone's accessing it. So, listen, Ciaran, thanks a million for sharing your insights into the world of safer gambling. Good luck with the newsletter. I'll have you on again and we'll have this chat again. And if I can help in any way, please do let me know. To everyone watching, thanks very much for listening. We'll be back with another episode. Until then, goodbye.